Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking to digital wellness, digital impact, digital leader, and all things digital, Dr. Gwenyth Jackaway, who is a leader in digital wellness. She was also a member of the Fordham University and Media Studies faculty for more than 25 years. She is a mother, an author, and currently serves as an educational consultant for Carrots&Cake, which is a parental control app that encourages kids to learn first and play later, equipping them to thrive in the digital age. And Dr. Jackaway, we were just talking before we started recording about how this digital age and all this digital media and technology is really nothing new, but it's always a challenge on how to actually use a new tool. So we're going to dive into that as well. But first, start by giving our audience a little bit of background about yourself and some of the work that you're currently doing.
Okay, well, greetings, Kristy, and greetings to your audience, and thank you for that lovely introduction. So, yes, a little bit about my background. So by training, I am a media historian, which means I'm interested in the history of mediated communication, which is what we're engaged in right now. It's being mediated by technology, right? And I studied American history as an undergraduate, and then I went on to do my graduate work in communication, and I brought them together. I'm very interested in how the human experience changes when we have new ways to communicate. Because if you think about it, one of our strengths as a species, which can also turn into one of our weaknesses when we don't do it well. But one of our strengths is our ability to communicate. We have large forebrains and language, and that allows us to collaborate and communicate and cooperate and argue, but in ways that the other species on our planet don't seem to be able to do, although they clearly communicate as well. So communication is so central to the human experience. And every time we have a new machine that really allows us to do something fundamentally different than what we used to be able to do before, that has a ripple effect. So you and I are in different states and in different time zones, and yet we're reaching across time and space to connect with each other. And that allows both of us to reach your community. And that's amazing. Right. But there are, with new communication technologies, just like with other technologies, like the car or the airplane or, the gun, there are pros and cons. Mm-hmm. So that's always been my area of interest. And I'm especially interested in the liminal period. Liminal means like the edges between one stage and another. So, we're in a liminal period now with digital media. It may feel like it's been around forever, but in the scope of human history, it's really very new still, right? The printing press was the dominant communication technology for about 500 years. So people had a long time to get used to it. And we're really, the internet is about 30 years old and the cell phone is about 12 years old. We're figuring out how to do this. For many years, I was a professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University, where I taught college students how to think about some of these issues, the impact of media on our society and in their lives and on our democracy and on our sense of self and on our relationships. And I recently left higher ed to bring my knowledge and experience to other environments. And I'm especially interested now in working with primary and secondary ed, because I spent so long teaching college students and I started to realize this is too late for people to learn about this when they're 20. Mm-hmm. We need to start talking to younger people because, as we all know, kids are growing up with devices in their hands and it needs to be on the curriculum, talking mm-hmm. about these technologies, their pros and cons, how to make wise and healthy choices about their use in their own lives. And it's becoming increasingly clear to me now that primary and secondary educators also need some context in which to think about the impact of these technologies as tools in the learning environment, their pros and cons, how to make the best use of them, how to stay in control in the classroom and not have the technologies take over, and how to use them to facilitate learning. You also mentioned about digital wellness. So one of the things that I did during the pandemic was I did a few trainings. I'm a longtime mindfulness meditator. And years ago in New York, when I first started seeing everybody walking around with their faces in their screens, I started realizing, wow, everyone is doing a screen meditation. I had this insight about bringing mindfulness to our technology use. So mindfulness is a particular kind of meditation that's really about being present in the moment, right? And if we're all facing the phone, we're not present with each other, we're not present with our students, we're not present with our children, we're not even often present with ourselves. So I'm not anti-technology at all. But I do think that it's time for us to learn how to make healthier, wise choices about our relationships with these devices. And so I also did a training in digital wellness, which is an emerging movement to incorporate our technology habits into our larger understanding of wellness. So we know we should get enough sleep and get enough exercise and eat properly and get some time outdoors. And now, as we think about wellness and all of its components, we need to factor in our relationship with these devices, because anything you're doing for 7 or 8 hours a day or more, probably worth taking a look at. Are you making healthy choices? And then we need to teach that to students. We need to teach it to our kids, and we need to support each other in using these devices, not having them use us.
Yeah. Well, so you said a lot of things in that I want to kind of circle back to. And I love the fact that you talk about these devices as having a relationship, and then you also mentioned the fact that we have these as tools and using them in an educational environment. And so I want to dive into that briefly as well. But first, talk a little bit about the actual impact on child development when you're talking about, because I'll be honest, I don't think that the educators have caught up, or maybe we're just scared. Like you said, we're afraid that these devices are going to take over the classroom. So it's put your cell phones away. Don't even look at them. Don't touch them. Don't think about them, which is kind of silly if you think about it. These children have grown up with these devices in their hands, but now we want them to revert back to paper, pencil, and put their cell phones away for 8 hours a day. But talk a little bit about just the overall impact that these devices do have on child development, whether that's a good impact or, not a great impact. What are we seeing with that?
So that's a great question. It's also a very complicated question, and one that I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to give you a nice, neat, pat answer, partly because child development, as you know, spans over many years. So if you're talking about toddlers, it's a very different issue than if you're talking about your 13-year-old, right? Who's already undergone a tremendous amount of cognitive development. The child is not one thing. And at different stages, their brains are transforming so quickly, and what they need developmentally from us and from their environment differs significantly across the age spectrum. Another reason that I can't give you a nice, neat, pat answer is, even though it feels like these things have been around for a while, social science moves slowly, and you need to have control groups, and you need to have comparison, and you need to have people who will let you study their children and experiment on them. Like the data, even though we all sort of feel that we have experiential data and we know what it's like when you try to take a pad away from a kid and they have a tantrum, and you might say, well, that proves something about all children. It's an emerging science, and we're still figuring it out, is the most honest answer I can give you. When I was young, TV was new, and people had all kinds of predictions about the terrible impact of television. What's interesting is we've stopped worrying about that.
Right.
And we've moved on to other devices. So now that I've given you that nice big caveat, I'll give you some things that we do know. So for the youngest of children, the ones that your audience may not be dealing with on a daily basis in their classroom, the toddlers, where they're still involved with language development. We know that face-to-face eye contact and turn-taking of dialogue is essential for language development. So when a baby babbles, blah, blah, ma, 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 pa, 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 all of that, they need, then the mom or the caregiver responds with some sounds, and they start to learn that can be instrumental, and they learn to make a sound that means the milk bottle, or they want a nurse, or they're asking for something, and it's the emergence of communication. So in the emergence of the communication skills, what kids really need is eye contact and practice turn taking. Now, interactive platforms on an iPad, or even some early TV shows tried to do this, where like Dora the Explorer would say, "Where's the map?" And she would pause. That was designed to get the child to respond. So that kind of responsive turn taking can be replicated through a technology or a pad where the child is prompted to respond in some way. But eye contact matters a lot. So for that age group, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And if a parent needs to hand a child a pad to take a shower or make dinner, or get through shopping in a store where they don't want a meltdown, the pad has a useful purpose. But if parents are using the pad or the technology to completely take over as a kind of digital pacifier or digital babysitter, then we do have enough data to show that there can be some delays in language development, and the lack of the development of the skill of turn taking. Like if we're having an interview, if you just kind of turn to the side and stop looking at me, you're communicating with me by nodding, smiling, or not smiling, and I can tell whether I'm connecting with you through all kinds of nonverbal signals, even though that we're separated by however many miles, and we're in a different place. So kids are learning all kinds of things in those early stages. Now, by the time we get to the school environment, kids also need to learn to pay attention. Being present and really paying attention is something that's happening inside. It's hard to tell, are you really paying attention? Or are you just smiling and thinking about what you're going to do for lunch? I don't really know, right? But we want to help kids learn to pay attention. That is something that teachers say many, many times a day, but what does it really mean, right? What does it really mean? So it's about being present and listening. And, I know teachers say things like, put on your listening ears, right? What is that about? It's about really being present and absorbing. Now, bringing screens into the classroom can be a wonderful tool. You can give them projects to do in class. They can do collaborations in class. The teacher can present things either on a big screen, where, people talk about screens in the classroom. There's often a great big screen in the classroom, and that can be very useful. But it needs to be balanced with human interaction, and teaching is so much a social phenomenon. Teaching and learning is a social phenomenon, which we really saw during the pandemic, right? So despite the best efforts of so many incredible educators who had to pivot and suddenly figure out how to teach on Zoom, there's a reason that there was a lot of learning loss. Or it wasn't, we got through as best we could, but we all got a big crash course in there's nothing that substitutes for real in-person interaction. So bringing screens into the classroom and having all the students face down looking at their devices all day, there's a problem there, because you're losing out on opportunity for interaction. Now, I've switched from talking about child development to learning, so I'm aware of that. But they're, to some degree, they're all intertwined.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So child development is a long process of learning. And as kids get older into elementary and high school or middle school, there's so many other kinds of things that they need to be learning, not just academic facts. They need to learn how to work in groups and follow rules, or how to challenge rules in a polite way, or how to collaborate and how to cooperate, how to work out disagreements. These are things that it's hard to do only through screens. So screens are a tool, but they can't substitute for the real life teacher and learning with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a really good point that you brought up about using these as a tool. So especially if we're talking about in the educational environment, do you think that it is somewhat of a challenge in the classroom? Because a lot of these students will come into the classroom and their world outside of school, especially when, like we just all came back from summer, right? A lot of kids have been on summer break. There's not a lot of learning during summer break. There's a lot of just parents are still at work. So kids are sort of left to be at home by themselves or be on their devices or play video games or whatever, which is totally fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just what happens. But then they come back and now we have a group of children that have been reliant on technology, cell phones, screens, video games to entertain them. And now all of a sudden we expect them to sit from 8 a.m. until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon without any of those tools beside them. So do you think we're sort of fighting against the challenge of kids are doing this outside of school, then they come to school and it's kind of like you're now down to nothing. They have all, then nothing.
So I'm well aware that there's a wide range of policies. There does not seem to be even consistency within a state or across school districts. And I'm sure that makes things even more challenging for teachers who are trying to figure out policies. I can imagine that it might be easier for teachers if there was one clear-cut policy, but I think it also varies considerably by age. I'm very much about balance. So I don't think that having an all or nothing policy really about just about anything except maybe really fatal behaviors. I don't think all or nothing tends to work. First of all, when you make something taboo, especially for certain age groups and certain personality types, then it's much more interesting. You say, don't open that cabinet. Well, what's in it? Right. So I would say that demonizing technology and making technology taboo only backfires because sure, with draconian authoritarian measures, you can enforce that, but then that fosters the idea that school is not a place where I feel comfortable. I meaning the student who really wants their phone. I think it makes far more sense. First of all, maybe starting by about age 7 or 8, I think having a conversation with students about why there are rules about technology is an important place to start. Because if the students pick up on the idea that technology is seen as bad, the things that they love doing are bad, youth culture is a problem, then school becomes a place that they don't really want to be. And it's kind of, even when you and I were young, it was, yay, school's out for summer and, no more teachers, no more books.
Right.
But we need to make learning a school a place that they want to come. And when there are too many of these kind of rules that take away what they love, then you have a problem. On the other hand, if everybody has their cell phone in their pocket during times of learning, that's also a problem. So, I would recommend a balance. So periods of the day when they're allowed to check for brief things, is there an emergency? Are their parents trying to reach them? You can have tech breaks. We all know teachers take them.
Yes.
Right? Teachers go to the bathroom and they check, or they go into the teacher lounge. There should be I believe, an acknowledgement that these are important technologies in our lives and a discussion with the kids. These things can be distracting, and we're here right now to focus, and there will be a break when you'll be allowed to check your device, but right now we're here to focus. And I think if they're given some time throughout the day to connect in that way, then it won't feel so, they won't feel so deprived. I also think it's important to explain to them that different rules apply in different places, right? So they may have different rules at home, and this is a school, and this is what we do in school. We're focused. We're here to learn. And And that's part of life. There's different rules for different contexts. You don't act the same in church or, on a public bus that you would in your bedroom. Just because you spent the summer on your device doesn't mean you get to use it all the time.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up, one, the balance thing, and two, how teacher behavior modeling impacts student behavior or student perception of what the rules are. And also the fact that we really should be, equipping these children, young adolescents, depending on their age, for a career, jobs, workplace, which I don't know about you, but when I go to work, even when I was in administration and education, I had my cell phone. When we were in meetings, I would check my cell phone on a break. I would glance down at it. No one was telling me not to look at it. And yes, teachers will do that in the classroom, right? If the kids don't have their phones, but the teacher will have their phone at their desk and will check it repeatedly. So we have to really be aware of that, I think, as well. But just the balance. And so I saw a system one time that I loved, and I can't even remember what district it was in, where they had like red, yellow, and green cell phone cards, right? So if the teacher put the thing on red, they had already had this conversation with the students. That meant that cell phones are turned over, they're put away, you're not looking at them, because now's the time when we want to be discussing or having dialogue or focusing, and I really need that distraction to be gone. Yellow, was like, okay, it still needs to be sort of away, but if you see a notification pop up or something that you just have to take care of, we're kind of, it's kind of okay as long as you do it to an acceptable point. And then green was, check your messages, take a break, check your notifications. Have you seen any systems in schools that use cell phones that you've noticed and that you've thought, okay, this is a great system, this really works? Do you know of any other systems out there? Because I'm sure there are teachers listening right now thinking, man, I wish I could come up with a really great system for my classroom. So I was just curious if you have seen any systems that work really well in a classroom.
Wow, that's a great question. And honestly, I haven't. But I do strongly believe that young people are watching us all the time. So if we're giving them mixed messages and we're giving the message that phone's bad, phone's not for learning, phone's not for school, and then the teachers are all using it.
Right.
That's, do as I say, not as I do.
Yes.
This also applies to parents as well. Of course, if parents are constantly scolding kids for using the very technologies that they purchased for them and gave to them, but the parents are on their phones and the parents are on their computers and parents are on their devices. Well, it's obvious that that guidance will be taken with a grain of salt, so to speak.
Yeah. And this is a different age of student too than when you and I were growing up, because when I was growing up, when I was in elementary school, middle school, I just did what the parents and teachers told me. I didn't question it. I didn't, teacher was always
a good girl.
I was. Teacher was always right. I knew my parents were always going to agree with the teacher, no matter if she was wrong or not. So I just did what I was supposed to do. And I think now we are really trying to teach our children, which can be a good thing, to not necessarily challenge, but to be critical thinkers, to ask questions, to engage, to discuss, which is a great thing for kids to do. And, like you said, this is just one thing, right, that we've kind of grabbed onto now. And so the historical perspective, I want to get back to that a little bit, that you were talking about, because before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about how it's right now it's this, years ago it was something else, and it will be something else in the future. It's just about how we use it and how we teach children to balance it. So talk a little bit about that historic perspective of new technology and where you think it's going from here.
Great. Well, where it's going, predicting the future is always dangerous. But one thing I can predict is there will be more machines. That's pretty safe as long as there are inventors and innovators and a perceived need for some new device. We'll keep having them. So I do believe that one of the things we all need to get a whole lot better at is adapting to change, because, just when we get used to one thing, then we move on. For a while, everyone was making PowerPoints, and now we're done with PowerPoints, and we move on to teaching platforms. And yeah, so let's think way back. One of the first essays, one of the first pieces of discussion that we have a historical record of about the impact of new communication technologies is a dialogue that took place between Socrates and Plato. Socrates was Plato's teacher, and Socrates and Plato were living and learning and teaching at a time when the Greek alphabet was emerging. So it's the emergence of writing in what we think of as the West. The Chinese got there long before we did, but this was the transition, the liminal period between an oral culture and a written culture. So Socrates, as some of your audience may know, we have named a certain teaching style after him, the Socratic method, which is a dialogic form of teaching. So the teacher poses a question, the student answers, the teacher asks another question, kind of diving a little deeper, and what are the implications of that? And then the idea is that the student will eventually reach an understanding through that dialogue process. And along comes writing, and Socrates warns, first of all, he warns it's going to make everyone's memory lazy, because now we don't have to memorize things, which they were very good at. They would memorize long speeches or the poetry of Homer because you had to, that was the only option. So he said it would make our memories lazy, and also it would greatly impact teaching, because now you could sit and read and the teacher doesn't have to be there. The author doesn't have to be there. You're sitting along with the text. And how do you interrogate the text? The writer is not there. And he predicted that it would impact learning. And here we are, now we look back at the two of them as great teachers. And of course they were, but the only reason that we know what Socrates said is Plato wrote it down. Mm-hmm. And here they were wondering about the impact of new media on teaching and learning. And here we are 2,500 years later, wondering about the impact of new technologies on teaching and learning. And so first of all, that tells me this is an age-old issue. And it's actually kind of amazing that the education system, as we now know it, was very stable for a long time. This idea of the sage on the stage in a room full of students with a blackboard and some writing implement, and that students have some way to write down or record what the teacher's saying. That was a stable model for a very long time, longer than many other environments, really. And at long last, teaching is getting challenged. And, that model worked for a long time, and it can be hard to change. But I think the ultimate issues that matter are questions of learning, teaching and learning. And how can we use these tools to foster the learning? And what does it mean to be a good teacher? And, the tools come and go. It's a pen, it's a chalkboard, it's a whiteboard, it's each generation has its new tools, but at its core, it's one of the most fundamental human tasks, the passing of knowledge on to the next generation. That's been happening since we were, living in caves, and somebody taught somebody else how to use a tool. And here we are years later. So I think it's dangerous to get distracted by the machine and say things like, well, a certain number of hours of screen time, or it's not about the tool, it's about the process of learning. And your audience, I assume many of them went to education school and learned about the process of learning, right? And that's what it boils down to. And now we have more tools available to us, which can in many ways make learning available to a broader range of students with different abilities, and students who are visual learners, or students who are more auditory learners. And I think it's an exciting time to be a teacher, and it comes with new challenges. But I think the key is not to let the tool take over, to remember that our job is to be teachers and support learners, and to keep their love of learning alive. When you stand outside of a kindergarten class at the beginning of the new school year, kids were so excited to go to school. And then something happens. Mm-hmm. And I'm not exactly sure when it happens, but it happens. And eventually they're, not so happy to be there. And I don't think that's about not loving learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great advice for teachers, educators, parents. Focus more on the process of learning and less about the tool that is being introduced. Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. Well,
Yeah,
Dr. Jackaway, yeah, I just, I know that they're listening and they're saying, okay, I love what she's saying, but I have to go in and teach. And all these kids just want to use their cell phone and they're all mad at me and I'm trying to deal with technology. So I think just the message of focusing on the process of learning is something that they can tuck away and kind of come back to.
Okay. Well, I want to be mindful of our time, and there's something that I want to be sure to tell you about, which is I am, as you mentioned at the beginning of our time together, I'm an educational consultant for Carrots&Cake, and Carrots&Cake talks about learn first, play later. So it's a marvelous tool. I would say especially, well, it's a marvelous tool for all parents in your audience. It also could be used in the classroom, but particularly for families at home, it's a wonderful way to promote learning and help mitigate some of the challenges and problems that can come with excessive screen use. So the name of the product, Carrots&Cake, refers to that age-old parenting advice: eat your vegetables before you have your dessert, right? And so here in this metaphor, the vegetables, the carrots, are learning content, learning apps, learning access to learning platforms, and then the cake, the dessert, would be any form of content that the child or young person especially enjoys and finds to be fun. And it's an app that can be downloaded onto the phone or the iPad, and the parent sets it up ahead of time, and you can specify what are going to be the carrots. So maybe it's a language learning app or a math learning app, or something like Khan Academy or Duolingo, and you set the amount of minutes that the child needs to use those learning apps, after which they can have their playtime. Mm-hmm. And that's where their agency can come in, and they can pick the thing that they love. The app allows the parent to block access to the internet except for specified sites that are permitted. And then they get a certain number of minutes in their playtime and the cake time. And there's counting down warnings, because we certainly know developmentally kids transition better if you say, okay, 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes, and now we're going to be transitioning soon. And then it comes to an end, which is also very useful, because the thing about online services is they don't have an end, right? Have you ever scrolled to the bottom of Instagram? It's not there, right? Same with TikTok. And we just kind of accept that as normal, but books end, movies end, TV shows end.
Yeah.
Things come to an end, and then you transition and you do something else. And so for parents who need to be working at home, or if you're going to a restaurant, or if you're even just at home and your child wants to have some screen time, but you want to put some limits on it, Carrots&Cake is a wonderful device that also helps promote all kinds of learning apps. And the folks at Carrots&Cake are happy to provide lists of learning apps and learning platforms that they suggest for different age groups.
Yeah. So it's actually giving the students, the children, what they want in technology, but it's also a great tool for parents to help them with the balance, help them know exactly what their kids are going to be, doing both academically and for pleasure on that learning device. And so I love the fact that it's really just sort of monitoring, and it's just a great tool for parents to try to help that balance, because as you said earlier, we don't want to completely take things away, but it's a lot of work for parents to have to try to monitor. Okay, what are you doing now? I want you to have fun on it, but at the same time, it's a lot of work. And I think that's sometimes why parents just give in and they just say, just do whatever. I don't know. It's too much for me. But this app,
right,
Carrots&Cake, seems like it's just a great tool for balance, letting the kids have fun while learning at the same time. And then it's also a parental control app that helps them monitor and control what they want their kids doing while still allowing their kids technology.
That's right. It also takes the parent out of the technology role. So, you can say, well, that's it. It went off.
Sorry.
Yeah. And as they get older and they understand that you've set it up, you can explain to them, like, technology is great. And like anything, it needs to have limits.
Right.
So I did want to tell you that your audience can have a 60-day free trial of Carrots&Cake. So it's carrotsandcake.com, all together, carrotsandcake.com. And if they use the code classroom, which goes with your podcast title, Classroom Matters. So if they use the code classroom, they can have 60-day free trial. And the folks at Carrots&Cake will be happy to help with any questions about setup, and you should give it a try.
Well, thank you so much. So we will have that for everybody listening. We will have that in the show description, 60-day free trial to Carrots&Cake. Use the code classroom, but we will include that along with the link to the website. And Dr. Jackaway, where can folks get in touch with you if they have other questions, want to have you as a guest, want to have you as a speaker, and just want to utilize your services? Is there a place where folks can contact you?
Sure. So I'm at Gwenyth Jackaway, PhD. So my name with the 3 letters, phd.com, and at Gmail. Sorry, the email is Gwenyth Jackaway, PhD at Gmail. And then my website is gwenythjackawayphd.com.
Well, thank you once again. We really appreciate it. I love all the work that you're doing. I love the historical perspective that you bring into everything. And so hopefully, as time goes on, teachers will start getting more into a different mindset of teaching and less focusing on the actual piece of technology. So thank you so much, Dr. Jackaway, for being on the show with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kristy. It's been my pleasure.
And this is Kristy Houle signing off for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast. And don't forget to look at the show description for your 60-day free trial to Carrots&Cakes.